everybody? I think time is ticking, so even though a few more people might join us, I think we need to get started. We only have an hour for this session, and we have a lot to fit in, so I think we need to make the most of the time that we've got available. So my name is Dale Robertson. I'm one of the two co-chairs of the Financial Sustainability Task Force of the EOSC Association. Thank you for attending this session, and welcome. The purpose of the session is to present to you the state of play, really, with the proposals at the moment, the preparation of the task force for its final report. We're going to provide you with a summary of our proposals so far, and then provide the opportunity for some questions and answers about some specific topics that we wanted to gather your information, your input about. So I'd like to just introduce who else is involved in this session. So firstly, my co-chair, Jan Meyer, who will be taking you through the summary of the proposals. But also we've got two other task force members, Ornella Di Giacomo and Patricia Merrigan, who are going to be helping with fielding the questions. But also, actually, and I'm dazzled so I can't see very well, but we've got several other task force members who are in the room. Can they stand up just so that we can see them? Okay, or put your hands up or whatever. Okay, so there's quite a number of people in the room as well. So, I mean, it's a sign, I think, of the extent of the commitment as well of this task force, actually. There's a lot of hard work that goes into this and a lot of good contributions. Okay, so, and then, can we go to the next slide, please? Oh, I think we're going backwards. Anyway, I'll keep talking, but there's an agenda slide, which I was about to run you through. Jan will present a summary. That's better. Okay, next slide, please. You're doing, okay, here we go. Jan will summarize, and then we'll have this discussion session. But at the end, we also will have Giorgio Rossi, who's a member of the EOSC steering board, who will also give us the benefit of a short statement, and then we wrap up. Okay, so that's our 60 minutes. So now I'll hand over to Jan.
Yes, thank you, Dale. Good afternoon, Jan Meyer with Dale, co-chairs of the Sustainability Task Force. So I'm just going to take you quickly, very quickly, through a lot of subject matter. So it's going to be dense and quick and hopefully not too complicated. To set the scene, as we've heard earlier today, EOSC is in a transition phase. It's a very dynamic environment, lots of things happening. And in that environment, we're trying to fulfill our charter, which is to develop financial scenarios for the core components of EOSC for the period post-2027. Right? So this is not about the ongoing procurement, this is for the post-2027 period. So there are three key moments that are interesting to highlight here. We've published an interim report in November last year. It's available on the eosc.eu website. Go to the website, Task Forces, find us, and you find the deliverable. We have done a targeted consultation, so it's not gone out to all the EOSC members or to the public, but it's gone out to specific target groups amongst the steering board, mandated organizations, and a couple of more. A report of the findings of that consultation has been published last week, and we aim to publish our final report in December. So, in order to do our work, to create financial scenarios for how does EOSC need to be funded, we need to have a certain simplification of what does EOSC mean, because EOSC means many different things for many different people. When we took a step back, we figured, okay, so it all starts with a policy choice made at the political level, enforced and strengthened by the recent ERA actions. EOSC enables, we want secondary use of research data, large scale at a European scale. Why do we want that? First of all, if you look at the budget of Horizon Europe, right, 100 billion, give or take, which is dwarfed, as we also heard, by the national budgets. And I checked the number, and for 2021, the national investment in research in the EU states, so that excludes the associated countries, was 100 billion. And I can only assume that this number is not going down. So that's a lot of money. At the end of the line, you have the research data. You want to preserve that. You want to put that to societal use, hence secondary use of European research data. If you want to do that, then apparently what you need to enable is the sharing of fair data at scale without friction, and apparently you need an EOSC consisting of a federation of data plus a marketplace for services to do that, which then leads to the notion that, okay, apparently that needs to be a collective European platform because nothing else makes sense with the ecosystem to build that platform. So, a couple of key points that we think are important to highlight. One, it's a collective platform, right? So, the implication of that is in order to achieve that collective platform, it requires a collective action, which means that you need to start aligning national strategies and national funding at that collective goal. If, for example, you would EOSC wash certain national activities, then you will not attain that goal. And that is important to keep in the back of your mind, and it needs to be at the EU level, national, institutional, and thematic level. So all of that activity needs to move in concert towards that common goal. It requires a long-term strategic commitment, and that is followed by long-term financing. And why do you need that? Because no one in their right mind is going to invest a lot of their efforts to integrate with a platform that you don't know will still be there 2 years down the line. And we don't know exactly what longevity means, because obviously there is a limit to that, what you can reasonably ask for, but it's more than the usual project cycle of 3-4 years, and it's more than the procurement cycle. It requires a federated approach. It has been mentioned very often, but we think that's a key point because the way that Europe is Europe, right? A centralized approach works in other geographies. It doesn't really work here because the way that we're put together, the way that funding works, and it needs to build on the existing effort that has been done over decades, because otherwise you're throwing away those investments, which, for example, have been done in the research infrastructures. Last but not least, a functioning EOSC requires a healthy dynamic with incentives to stimulate the right behavior. The right behavior would be stimulating people to plug into EOSC and not to do that. The right behavior would also contributing to the ecosystem and not keep putting your national funding in purely national goals. How am I for time? It's reasonable. So in scoping our work, we follow the standard EOSC triad architecture with the federation of data that unifies all the different data infrastructures into one coherence, with the EOSC Exchange, a marketplace for services, and the EOSC Core that provides the organizational and technical underpinnings of the two aforementioned. In our view, it's the federation of data that is the most important because of the policy goal, right? Secondary use of data, you need the federation of data, and the other things are then complementary to that. So if I look at the federation of data, at the heart of the EOSC, it won't store or own any data. It's a pure federation. So that simplifies what it needs to do at a European level. It's the logical evolution of investments that have been ongoing for decades in research infrastructures, and it needs to build on that. And if you look a bit deeper into it, so for research infrastructures to connect to this federation in sufficient numbers and over time, you're going to incur a certain amount of cost to make that integration happen, to prepare your data to make that happen, and to adapt to the evolution of EOSC. And that's going to be a continuous cost, and that needs to be carried somewhere. We're not entirely sure yet of the EOSC level cost, other than the core, but you can clearly see that there is effort required at a national level and at the research infrastructure level to verify your data and to do those integrations. So this is an incomplete piece of analysis. We're working on that. The marketplace is I'm not going to ask you to read all that. The marketplace, we're further with our analysis. So there is in all the EOSC models, there is an assumption that there will be a marketplace for services. So we had a careful look at that. What does that actually mean and what does that imply? And it seems to fall apart in essentially 3 different components. You have what effectively is enabling the free movement of services. It means that if I want to use a service that is produced in France, then I should be able to do that. I don't then have to develop that service myself. But to do that, certain barriers need to be overcome. Cross-border service delivery is one thing. There's going to be mandates that need to be sorted out, and money has somehow to flow to compensate for that extra service usage. Those are some of the issues that need to be resolved, and I think that was, yeah. This boils down to enabling the brokering of services, and it does not solve the funding of underfunded services. There is no magical bullet for that. We've heard time and again that there is an issue with services that are being developed by project funding, and then there is an operational phase that there is no funding for. That's a different problem, and that requires a cost share. And that is not something that EOSC is going to magically resolve. Let's see. The direct cost of that is you need the marketplace mechanisms, plus you need to incentivize service providers, be it e-infrastructures or research infrastructures, to actually put their services in the marketplace. You need to make the platform grow. The indirect cost will be the consumption of the services by the researchers, and that's then, for this category of exchange services, covered by the cost recovery mechanisms. We don't really know which of the cost recovery mechanisms are most prudent in an EOSC context. The ones identified are cash, transactions, virtual access, and vouchers, and all 3 carry issues. So it's not going to be trivial to get this done. Yeah, and last thing I want to say about this, there are probably 2 classes of services that you can distinguish that would be made available here. One class is, and that's being mentioned relatively often, stimulating best-of-breed services to bubble to the top, if you wish. Why do we need 1,000 OneDrives if we could have a handful of really good ones? But the other side of the equation is that there are probably quite a number of smaller scale services that are really niche products. And here what the exchange needs to do is different. It needs to facilitate transactions for someone who can't really have the resources to organize that themselves. If I want to establish a 100 million service, I also have the money to facilitate transactions if I really want to, but the exchange makes it easier. But if I'm a tiny service, then I can't carry that cost. And if the exchange facilitates that, then you enable that sharing of services in a much broader scale. Second item, so I said 3 items. Second item is a collective portfolio of agreements with commercial services. There has been activity in a couple of European projects on that. The whole concept here is EOSC is a wide community, consists of thousands of institutions, hundreds of aggregators, research infrastructures, e-infrastructures. Rather than having all those entities negotiate separately with commercial services, why don't we do that as a collective? We get a better deal and we get less burden for the individual stakeholder. It's quite promising. Are a couple of issues with that. Legislative is one of them. The EU procurement directive is valid within the EU. The EOSC space is larger than that. You have all the associated countries and your mileage varies in how you solve that problem. Still quite useful. There is a direct cost you need to do those procurements, and this is not cheap. The experience number is 1 million euro per year for a relatively big agreement. The indirect cost is, again, the consumption of the services by the researchers, and how that is covered we consider to be out of scope. And then there is, and this is I think mostly talked about, the collective portfolio of collectively financed services. There is a lot of collective in this presentation, and with purpose. After all, EOSC is a collective effort. A collection of services for the greater good of the whole. But what does that mean? And that proved to be quite an elusive concept, right? So the EC is procuring this, but what is the purpose behind it? So you can identify a couple of purposes that we've listed here. Effectively, you could argue that the EC is now doing this because it's a nice marketing tool to pull users and data towards EOSC. But the real answer is, at the moment, we don't really know. Is there anything else? Yeah, that needs to be subject to appropriate governance structures to decide, right, this portfolio, what does it consist of, and how big is it? The current EC procurement is 16 million for effectively compute, storage, and data transfer. Is that a sufficient size, or should it be 1 billion? And the question is, it depends what you want to achieve. What are the policy goals that you want to satisfy with this, and how do you want to change the landscape? And that is not our decision to, or ours to advise on. There is an indirect cost, obviously. There is the matter of governance. There is the matter of getting these services in, selecting them, etc., etc., etc. And then, finally, the EOSC core, the thing that underpins the federation of data and the EOSC marketplace. I should have gone back one. What I didn't say, so marketplace, 3 components. The first component is effectively self-financed, the second component is collectively financed, and the third component is collectively financed. And what we mean with collectively is member states and EC jointly. And I come back to that here, because the core was in many ways the easiest to solve. Right? It's very simple. If you want to have that EOSC federation, you're going to need some technical and organizational underpinnings, and apparently that is called a core. And to our best knowledge at this point in time, something like that sets you back about 60 million euros, and then a couple more. So say, order of magnitude, couple of tens of millions. That's the amount that you need to finance for that. Because it's a collective good, it makes sense to have both collective governance and collective financing. Collective financing, getting member states in on it, also means that member states get skin in the game. And we believe that it's important that member states get skin in the game, because then they care. Why would you care about something that you're not directly paying to? But you care a lot when the money comes out of your own wallet, even if only partly. So that's our recommendation, jointly funded by the EC and the member states. This also ensures the longevity that you need in order to actually draw data and services and users to a common platform. See, anything else I want to say about this? Core should be kept minimal, right? And that's a sensitive point. And we'd like to flag that this is going to be a sensitive point. It's going to be a relatively easy source of money, so it would be nice to be part of that. And we have to make sure that only useful things are part of that. So that's going to require an interesting process. What is minimal will obviously evolve over time as EOSC evolves over time. Let's see. Yeah, I think I've said about this what I want. So, in summary, EOSC is a collective effort, and that requires an alignment of national, EU, institutional, and thematic strategies and funding. Data federation is the most important to enable that policy goal of supporting the secondary use of research data. Yeah, and I think I would like to end on what is really key. If you have this collective platform, you're going to need a healthy dynamic that stimulates the right behavior. And you could also argue that you need some incentives that punish the wrong behavior. And I think I'll leave it at that with 5 seconds over time.
Okay, thank you very much, Jan. Okay, so because we've got such limited time, we're not opening the floor now for general discussion. We can do, if there's time, after we've dealt with the questions that we really wanted to get some feedback from you on. So I'd like to now invite Ornella to come up, and she will deal with the first of the questions. I think if you, can we have the slides back, please? Can we bring the slides back on the screen, please? Thank you.
Yes. Hello. Since Jan closed his presentation talking about incentives, the first question we wanted to pose to you for discussion was what financial incentives would encourage data and service providers to join the federation? And we emphasize financial because we have talked a lot about incentives in other contexts, but if we would have a pot of money that we would generously give to you, what would you put that money into? This is what we would like to know, so I open the discussion. Good, then nobody would ask for money. DC can leave. We don't need grants, we don't need call. Yeah. We have one over there.
I think all the microphones might be up here, though, so. Okay.
Maybe now? Yeah. So I'm Sebastian from Switch. This is the Swiss National Research and Education Network. From my perspective, what I would encourage our data and service providers is to obtain financial incentives to operate a data a service or other services over a longer time frame. And essentially, whatever is defined as being the life cycle of a data service, a data infrastructure, or a service associated to this. So this is my input.
Assuming long-term commitments for the operation.
I would put money in, so let's say, in things like metadata standards development, terminologies, things like that. So I think infrastructure is easy, and that to me is the difficult part of sharing data.
Hi, my name is Kostas Koumatos. I work for Genetic Greek and REN, and also I'm the head of the vice president of the Hellenic Open Science Initiative. For us, the important thing is sustainability of infrastructures for long-term preservation, which is something which needs to be funded either both nationally and European-wide for thematics areas. And long-term means sustainability, means that we span from different technologies, we change technologies, we change a number of different things. And this is something that, at least in Greece, it's quite hard to do when it comes to infrastructure. There is not a way to fund, let's say, for the next 20 years something. You can fund it for the next 2 or 3 years according to the life cycle, but going further on for, let's say, for a generation of 30 years, that is complete out of scope. And this is something we need to help. The other thing that I would finance as a European-wide is the idea of exchange of services, resources, data sets, whatever goods each country or each provider has within Europe, which requires also a level of interoperation and interoperability, which is not funded somewhere.
Hello, Mikel Iceta from the National Center for Biotechnology here in Spain. I would say from more of a technical point of view, it would be a really nice incentive to have money that can be effectively invested in a long-term hiring kind of a scenario to maintain those services or that data, like hiring a specific person to develop or to work on that service, as in support or anything like that.
Hi, Helen Clare from JISC in the UK. I'm probably going to ask a very obvious question here. It's more a clarification of your question. If I was a service provider and somebody said offered a financial incentive, I would just say yes. You know, I'm a bit missing the question, I think. It's financial incentives for what in particular? If somebody said, I will give you a financial incentive to join EOSC Federation, would they just say yes? Are you wanting more detail on incentives to do particular actions? Or
What kind of, for example, to cover operation costs, for recruiting, the long-term perspective? So what would be an incentive to make the effort to join?
Right, okay, thank you.
During the presentation, we said that making data fair, investing, requires efforts and requires resources. So why would you invest in doing this? There are different kinds of incentives. We are interested in to know what would move you from the financial point of view.
Hi there. I guess I'd like, in answering this question, I would like to distinguish the effort that any given data provider or any given service provider would normally make to make its data or service open. And then separately, what is necessary to make that data or service available through the federation. So there may be additional steps. So as an example, I can annotate my data based on my disciplinary metadata standards, and all is fine within my community. But if I'm being asked to put it into the federation, I may have to add new information to the data in order for other people to find the data and figure out what it means. That's for a piece of data. Ditto for services. If I'm provided and funded to provide this service within my community, that's already taken care of. But if I'm offering this service to a wider community, there'll be additional costs to operate the service for many more users or for new requirements. So there are incremental marginal costs in doing that. These are for individual pieces of data and for services. The question you asked is joining the EOSC Federation, which may be an additional level of activity, and I don't think we properly, or at least I haven't seen a full definition of what it means to do more than just be a provider into EOSC and actually to join the federation. What obligations would I have to be a federation member, to have my Starship enterprise join the federation? I don't know what's involved in that over and above being a data provider or a service provider. So I guess I'm struggling with that a little bit, but I think in essence, we're talking about the marginal cost of participating in EOSC over and above what I might normally do within my open science community, within my discipline.
May I just follow up on your comment, which I think is really interesting. Rupert Lück from EMBL. I'm not necessarily sure whether these costs are marginal towards these extra mile. So imagine you have a large-scale data repository that you operate for a couple of decades, and you have done and worked with your stakeholders, with your community to make this extra and super accessible. And then all of a sudden we are asked to link those data and make those data, as you say, into EOSC. This has, I think, quite a number of issues in there and work, and together with this work comes costs, and I'm not so sure whether these are quite marginal. Let's put it this way. It's additional costs, and then the other thing is, so it's cost. then there is a question: does that fit with my strategy? So is that a strategic perspective? What is the additional momentum that let's say the institution or this database receives in terms of additional visibility or recognition or accessibility to other communities? And all these kind of stuff, all these kind of issues require a motivation to create this traction, and financial and other incentives might help with this. So I think that's why this question is brought forward.
Thank you. Thank you all for your contributions. We will move on with another question. So I introduce Patricia Mergen.
Good afternoon. So we would need the slides to show the next question. You can put on the presentation. Yeah. No, it's the one before. There is a slide before. Yeah. So to introduce the next question, instead of a long text that you had now, we choose an image. So don't worry, we will share the presentation so you can play the game and check if we didn't forget your logo there. But what we wanted to show is that actually for a real life check, we live in a forest or in an ocean, as we have many marine contribution here, of existing thematic research infrastructure and data spaces with an European scale, but many also, as we said, have a worldwide scope. So we know some are already collaborating with each other and sharing data, but I am sure there are also among those, if it's outside your competences, you don't even are aware that they exist. Which brings us to the second question. Next slide. So, do I do this? No. I have to work myself. So, the second question, so EOSC is sold to us as bringing economy of scale to make all these infrastructures talk to each other and make more efficient science. So, do you agree that to achieve that, this economy of scale, will this research infrastructure have to give up some of their actual services, also some of their money, to either merge some existing individual research infrastructure or to delegate some of their activities, also their money, to EOSC for these common services we described in the introduction? So we would like to have your opinion on that. How can all these very nice research infrastructures continue to exist and strive together with EOSC in an efficient way? So you have the floor. Nobody? Nobody dares?
I'll try, Patricia.
Okay.
It's a very general question for a very difficult answer. Yeah. I suppose it depends on many parameters, and I would say that it depends also on the usage, on the business models, on the impact of the infrastructures, all things that are very difficult to measure, of course. But I think this kind of measurements needs to be in place, and at a certain point you have to make a decision, a hard decision, to say, okay, we have to stop this service or this infrastructure and merge it or start using another service and infrastructure. It's decisions that are always taken, and sometimes we just wait too long with it, but it's hard to do, and it's not a black and white story either, so that's the only thing I can say on it. So yes, probably sometimes we should, but we have to do it in a very considered way.
Thank you.
Yeah, hi, René Belso. I'm actually part of the task force. I would like to pick up on that. So might one not say that these very hard decisions, the process of getting through these hard decisions as what to fund and what to kill, that has to be some kind of regulation mechanism. So there has to be some degree of skin in the game, as Jan was speaking about. It has to be such that the people benefiting from this, or their representatives, they make these hard decisions for you. You can maybe participate in this, trying to make yourself attractive, but at the end of the day, it has to be that the ones putting up the money are also the ones taking it away. And at the moment, that seems only to be the European Commission. So what we're proposing is for the member states to have a say in this, such that the money also comes from the ones who have real interest in this and who actually are the ones backing up the strategy.
Pat, there was a tone of provocation in your question.
Yes.
But I would argue that there is a very solid basis in what you're saying. In fact, research infrastructures are designed to be able to procure services that are of value for their communities. It's not new. We do procure many services that we think are important, from very core services like compute and storage to other kinds of services that are more dedicated to the communities. So I would turn the question around, and I would say that what are those core services from the EOSC point of view that actually provide that value? And then I don't feel any hesitation to say that research infrastructure should pay for those, but at the point of usage.
Yeah, really depends on the infrastructure. For an infrastructure that produces data with instrument and all that, I don't see, I see that we will have an incremental activity or an additional activity with EOS. I don't see which type of activity we would shut down.
So in a nutshell, we would need to reach a win-win situation on the same level.
Maybe just a thought on pooling from an economic perspective. You could pool this, which should become a commodity.
Apologies, I haven't joined from the beginning, but I think the main model for EOSC is federation. So all these thematic infrastructures should be federated, and I don't think that they should give up some of their, let's say, key thematic, let's say, services. If there are, of course, some horizontal services from the thematic community, I think this is a different story, and some of these can be either combined through cluster projects in the overall community, or if they are really horizontal, like AI and things like that, these are indeed taken up by EOS core and the infrastructures. But overall, I think the architecture of EOS is that, so that they don't need to really give up their thematic added value services.
So, yeah, well, we have also a small third question that you can put on the presentation again if you want. Yeah. Next, yeah, I have to do it. Okay. So we had also a third question that we would have used as a take-home message, but if we have here a bit time. So in general, being it EU funding or national funding, often everybody wants new service, the buzzword innovation and creativity, but when you ask the necessary funds for maintenance and operational, often the funders are not so happy because they want visibility. So how would you see who should fund this very necessary long-term maintenance and operation so that EOSC should work, with the assumption that maybe EOSC will not pay this? And if somebody else would need to pay it, who would you see doing this? maybe do you expect EOSC to pay that, or should it be somebody else? Good that my Belgian friends are here.
My thought is, I'm Anders from Dijk, that already a lot of different stakeholders pay for services and repositories and stuff that benefit their users. So yes, the users to some extent, and we're talking about co-creating EOSC between European level, institutional level, national level. So in my understanding, if EOSC is a federation, these different stakeholders will fund the different parts of the EOSC Association at their level. So I would expect institutions to pay a part for their operations, research infrastructures pay part of their operations, national providers such as us pay for national services, European Commission pay for European level service. That would be, in my view, the logical, at least, starting point for discussion.
Yep. Thank you. Any last questions? Anything online, maybe, or?
If I got the question correctly, I think the question is what happens with projects that finish, and then what happens with their services or tools that they have developed, and who takes them over, and whether the EOSC Association has a role in this. I think that, and we had this discussion during the break, for example, for NIFOS Europe that did some very good work and useful tools, and also some ongoing projects that may end up in a couple of years, and what happens with the results of these. So I think there should be a model to take up these services and tools and continue, with the software, with everything, so that they are sustained and they are useful for the community. Because this is a key point. If these are, abandoned after a couple of years, then there is no sustainability. So there should be a model to take this on board.
Yes, thank you. Yeah. So indeed, project outcomes are very important to keep when they are efficient and functioning.
Ivan Maric, I will continue on Fortis. But this is the problem of the body that financed the project in the first place. If you don't see or ask for the sustainable model after the project funding is ended, then you shouldn't fund this. This is the EC problem or national problem, institutional problem. It should be developed in the roadmap of the life cycle of going through the project to the service model. This question is very much related to the first question of incentiveness. Operation is one thing, but development and operation is basically what we want to achieve. The continuation on development, and sometimes it's not on the institutional, national, or European level. It's on the basically the basic business model between service provider and the consumer of the service. And even more, we put the more complexity in EOSC model, introducing profit organization and most of us which are not profit organization. What is the incentiveness for Microsoft to provide EOSC service? Profit. What is incentiveness for me? It's not profit, something else. So how to combine this public-private partnership or profit and not profit stakeholders in one environment? It's a very tough question. I would say let's take money from Microsoft, Amazon, and others and finance future operation of non-profit organization.
Thank you.
Yep, but now that we have this problem, that there is a lot of projects that have sustainability issues, can we then not conclude either these projects are really not wanted by the people who are supposed to operate them afterwards, or there is some error in the funding model. So we have to get a bit deeper. So if we're funding a lot of projects that really nobody wants, that's one issue. We have to deal with that. And if there is an error in the funding model, we have to fix it.
Hi. I just to kind of continue discussion about the project outputs and the sustainability. Sometimes it's just about kind of sustaining a community and some sort of platform for it. As a really concrete example, I think it was in the EOSC Future meeting earlier this week, we were discussing what to do with the software produced by the project. And one idea, of course, is to put it all in the GitHub, and it's open source, and everybody can continue developing it. But then there became a discussion that GitHub is not a European company, and we don't know what is the kind of sustainability actually with that one. Somebody should run this kind of repository in Europe, and who could do that? And there was, I was thinking maybe EOSC Association could be one of these, who could kind of maintain some of this kind of background infrastructure to maintain it, but I don't know.
Thank you. Yes, that brings us to the discussion that many depend on international input and not only European. That's what we said here. So time flies, so we need to finish with the discussion part, and my colleague Dale will do the wrap-up of the session. Thank you very much for your contribution.
So thank you very much to Ornella and Patricia, and to all of you for your contributions. So the next part of our agenda, in fact, is a statement from the steering board. So I'd like to invite Giorgio Rossi to take the stage for that part of our agenda. Thank you, Giorgio.
Thank you. So this is an impromptu statement from the steering board. The steering board represents member states and associate countries, and the members of the steering board have to connect the EOSC thinking to the ministries, government, and translate in effort that the government must undertake for good reasons. So the issue of a financial model has very much to do with the level of financial effort that is planned and expected. So at member state levels, it's important to know what is the additional financial effort that will add to the current financial effort for data, research data networks, e-infrastructure, research infrastructure for the data part of their budget, computing, memories, and etc. that are already in place that need continuous support for upgrade, for operation, and periodically for major upgrades. So financial model and financial effort are not independent issues, and so they cannot be dealt with separately. We need to come soon to an agreed best guess of the additional EOSC budget for the next 5 or 10 years and the time profile of this budget. For example, we are discussing governance models, and just take one example. One governance model that is being considered is the 1+2 and 3+4+5. So the deployment and operation of the EOSC European node to be indirect funding, so managed by some dedicated organization. Now, again, we have to know how much is that, because for 3+4+5, that is the full engagement of the community, the research, the prototyping, etc., that will be standard European Commission budget, and that is no surprise. But for this 1+2, what is the correct estimate. Because if the correct estimate is 10 million per year, 100 million per year, another amount, then the financial model must be correct for that level of engagement, percolating down to all the individual contributions of the different member states. So this is very important. So to say the governance model must be evaluated against the financial effort, and the needed financial effort will shape the financial model that goes with that. So we have to cost as best guess, but as realistic as possible, the cost of EOSC for the next 10 to 9 years. We have heard numbers, but only on this counterfactual argument. It has been said that not having fair data, research data, may cost more than 10 billion euro per year. I don't know if this is a good number. We heard before 100 billion is the research. In fact, if we take the gross domestic expenditure in research and development, it was 320 billion in 2017. So this means estimating a 3% worth of the secondary use. What about if it was the 10% worth of the secondary use or 20% worth of secondary use? So this kind of reasoning must translate in how much does it actually cost to avoid that loss, which is again estimating what is the engagement, the extra effort that we are asking to our member states and associate countries in order to make EOSC successful and in the good line to produce the best results and avoid these shortcomings. Concerning some of the discussion that we had, in my view, research infrastructures, of course, have developed and do develop their services specific to their communities. Research infrastructure cost about 2 billion per year just for the ESFRI one, and 10 billion per year for the whole ensemble of national infrastructures. 15% of that is more or less the share of the cost that goes into the data. So it's an important envelope of resources that again has to be understood, has to be quantified, and that justifies all the effort in services, but they are specific services. What the research infrastructure is not supposed to do, because it's not funded to do, is the broad interoperability. So the EOSC services could be some very practical services like permanent identifiers in a uniform way, probably a good metadata repository, transdisciplinary, but then all the technology that will make the data interoperable, because that is beyond the budget and the scope of each given research infrastructure. But otherwise, the valuable services that are done by the research infrastructure should remain, should be federated, and possibly should become of interest for others. A last point for the full comprehension about the member states is that EOSC is an additional cost, is something new that nevertheless sits on a basic infrastructure that is computers, that is memories, that is optical fibers, that is all what every country in Europe at national level is already supporting. Very good. Do we have an estimate of how much of that will be occupied or saturated by EOSC in its full development? Because that's again a very important economic element. A country that has to maintain or upgrade the network, the computing power, must know if a small fraction, a sizable fraction, or a important fraction would be absorbed by something that is not in the historical pipeline of justification for science and innovation. So I think it's time that we come with some realistic, agreed best guess of what we want to invest in the next 5 or 10 years, even better, and then transfer this uniform information to the member states and associate countries and engage with them a discussion on this financial need, and then the model will come out, both for how to finance that and the general governance of the process. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Giorgio, and particular thanks actually because Giorgio in fact stood in to do this at the last minute because we had a bit of an availability mix-up with our steering board members, so thank you again. So it just remains for me to wrap up this session because we're out of time. I think what you can see is that we're digging into some really quite challenging discussions in the task force, and you saw the questions, they're quite difficult questions. Thank you very much for the input that you've provided. It's really helpful to us and we appreciate it. If you feel that there are points that we've missed, you saw the summary presentation that Jan gave, please come and find either me or Jan or Ornella or Patricia or indeed any of the other members of the task force, because there are certainly numerous of them here. Please provide your input and we will do our best to take it on board. We certainly are open to hearing people's points. So I'd just like to finish by once again thanking everybody, Giorgio, Jan, Patricia, Ornella, and all of you for your contributions. Thank you very much.